goals galore. What a goal! That is quite superb.
It's a very good finish.
Now, with 16 teams left in the hunt, enjoy 2 live matches from the Scottish Cup 4th round. Another exquisite goal.
That's a brilliant finish.
Starting with Forfar Athletic versus Dundee United, live Friday at 7:30 on the BBC Scotland channel.
Warning, this is just the beginning.
What started out as a cybercrime is now tipping into threats of real-world violence.
It was the greatest illusion that was perpetrated in sport ever. There was nothing about that man that was real.
I'm not a bad person. I'm not a monster.
There's more than meets the eye. With True Crime Podcasts on BBC Sounds.
Now on BBC One Scotland, it's 10 o'clock, the BBC News with Fiona Bruce, followed by the latest election news from Scotland in the campaign.
The UK vaccination programme hits its first target and moves on to phase 2, but it comes with a warning. As the over 45s are called to have the jab, the Prime Minister says we mustn't let our guard down.
It's not just the vaccine rollout that's causing the reduction in deaths and infection. We need to continue to be cautious and be sensible as we roll forward with the vaccination programme.
And manufacturer Johnson & Johnson is forced to delay the rollout of its vaccine in the US and Europe because of safety concerns. Also tonight. The revelations keep coming in the David Cameron lobbying row as Labour calls for a full parliamentary inquiry. A second night of violence on the streets of Minneapolis after the fatal shooting of a black man by the police. Students at university in England will be able to go back for face-to-face teaching from May the 17th. And despite this incredible goal from Porto, it was Chelsea's night in the Champions League.
And on the campaign at 10:30, I'll have all today's top stories, and our panel will be dissecting this evening's leaders' debate. Plus, a look at what businesses reliant on tourism are looking for from politicians this election. Good evening. The NHS in England has started offering COVID vaccinations to people aged over 45. But as the vaccination programme continues to make progress, there's a warning from the Prime Minister. Vaccinations alone won't stop further infections or even deaths. And he's urging caution in how we enjoy our newfound lockdown freedoms. And today, Public Health England have ordered surge testing in 2 London boroughs after discovering a new outbreak of the South African variant of COVID-19. Here's our health editor, Hugh Pym.
Feeling well today? Yeah, I'm feeling fine.
A first jab with a new vaccine, this one supplied by the US company Moderna, made available in England for the first time today following Wales and Scotland last week. It's a timely arrival as supplies of AstraZeneca doses have slowed for a few weeks.
Thank you. I didn't feel anything.
And all this as some under 50 were able to sign up for vaccinations. Caroline and Mark, aged 48, came in this morning, having only booked online last night.
I'm very pleased to have had it at last. It's been a long time coming, so yeah.
Yeah, it's good. That's nice to have that protection.
Another 48-year-old, Martin, also got a Moderna jab today.
It's a move in the right direction, definitely. It feels like finally joining the other 30 million that have already got it.
Vaccine doses were flown in to Scotland's most remote island community, Fair Isle, with a population of 48. There hasn't been a single COVID case. It saved them having to travel to the mainland, and they've now had both doses. The government says all those in priority groups, including aged 50 and over, have now been offered a first dose. In England and Scotland, those aged 45 and over are now eligible. In Wales and Northern Ireland, people in their 40s are getting it. But from the Prime Minister, there was a note of caution.
The success of the vaccine rollout is great, but it's not just the vaccine rollout that's causing the reduction in deaths and infection. Overwhelmingly, that's been delivered by the lockdown. Now, we need to continue to be cautious and be sensible as we roll forward with the vaccination programme.
Around the UK, there is variation in the rollout of the vaccination programme. Among those aged 50 and over, 94% have had a first dose in both England and Scotland. In Wales, it's 88%, and in Northern Ireland, just 63%. There are regional differences within England. In the southwest, for example, 97% have had a first dose, but in London, it's just 86% of those aged 50 and over. There is a little uncertainty over future vaccine supplies, but NHS leaders and ministers think the target for all adults being offered a jab is still on track.
The supply forecast gives us confidence that, assuming that those supplies carry on as expected, then yes, we will not only deliver on the April 15th milestone of everybody aged 50 and above having had the chance for their vaccine, but all adults by the end of July.
Queues built up today outside testing stations in parts of South London. Residents have been urged to get tested because cases of the South African variant have been identified, including in a care home. Officials say they're linked to a traveller arriving from Africa in February. It's another reminder of the continuing threat of the virus. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
Johnson & Johnson has delayed the rollout of its COVID vaccine in Europe after regulators in the United States called for a pause because of safety concerns. 6 people who'd had the vaccine in the US have developed rare and severe blood clots. It's so far been given to almost 7 million Americans. Our medical editor, Fergus Walsh, reports.
An abundance of caution was cited by US health officials as the reason why they paused the use of the single-shot Johnson & Johnson COVID jab. The vaccine, which in Europe is branded as Janssen, was approved in the US in late February. Since then, there have been 6 incidents of very rare clots in the brain out of 6.8 million doses, so less than 1 case per million people immunised. All were women under 50, 1 of them died, and 1 is critically ill.
I think this is an unusual occurrence of a serious adverse event that you want to make sure before you go forward, you investigate it thoroughly. And that's exactly what they're doing. They're pausing so that they can look at it more carefully.
Similar, very rare clots have occurred with the Oxford AstraZeneca jab, and scientists are investigating whether this type of vaccine technology could be implicated.
Both of these vaccines used a disabled common cold virus called adenovirus to smuggle the gene from the coronavirus spike protein into the vaccine, into your arm. So they both work in broadly the same way, and that raises the possibility that something about this type of vaccine could be the explanation for this kind of very rare side effect.
30 million doses of the J&J Janssen vaccine are on order for the UK, although it's yet to be approved. It's hoped the delay in the rollout won't slow the vaccination drive here. The biggest concern is globally. The plan was to immunise 1 billion people worldwide with the vaccine this year. If that's disrupted, it will slow efforts to finally bring the pandemic under control.
Well, Fergus, let's come back to the situation here in the UK. And we heard the Prime Minister earlier on saying that the reduction in deaths is mainly due to the lockdown, but we know that the vaccination is playing a crucial role as well.
Absolutely. 19 out of 20 adults over 50 in the UK have had at least 1 dose of COVID vaccine so far. That's a stunning level of uptake. And it's estimated that vaccines have prevented at least 10,000 deaths here. Now, the top 9 priority groups represent 99% of those at risk of dying from COVID. So you might say, job done. Well, not quite. There's still over 1 million people in those at-risk groups not immunised, and the vaccines are not 100% effective. Then there are more than 20 million people aged 18 to 50 who haven't had a COVID vaccine yet. And I've seen plenty of people in their 30s and 40s in hospital with COVID. There are enough people in the community unprotected to sustain another surge of COVID infections. Now, as society gradually opens up, we will see more cases, but the more people who are immunised, the sooner we will absolutely break the link between infections and deaths. So for now, we are still in a race between the vaccine and the virus, with the hope of a return to something like normal life in the summer here, with a much bigger task worldwide.
Fergus, thank you. Well, let's take a look at the latest coronavirus figures. There were 2,472 new coronavirus infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period, with, on average, 2,757 new cases being reported per day in the last week. There are currently 2,537 people in hospital with COVID-19. 23 deaths were reported in the latest 24-hour period. That's of people who died within 28 days of a positive COVID-19 test. On average in the past week, 34 deaths were announced every day, bringing the total to 127,123. Nearly 60,000 people have had their first dose of a COVID vaccine in the latest 24-hour period, bringing the total to over 32 million, while more than 200,000 people had their second jab, meaning nearly 8 million people have now had both doses of the vaccine. The Scottish Government has decided to bring forward the easing of some coronavirus restrictions due to falling infection rates. The First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, said non-essential travel would be allowed throughout the country from Friday, and more people would be permitted to meet outdoors from then because the pandemic is now in retreat. Students on all university courses in England will be able to return from May the 17th. Since the start of the year, about 1 million students have been taught online, with only those on practical hands-on courses allowed in-person teaching. But the wait of another month to fully open was described as hugely disappointing by Universities UK. Our education editor, Branwen Jeffries, reports from the University of York.
Finishing touches to a huge tent. Not for a festival, but for students. York University taking its student union outside, ready for when they're welcomed back onto campus.
It's incredibly, I think, stressful for students. You know, we're sitting here today, you can get a haircut, you can get a holiday home, you can go to the pub, but unfortunately you can't have any in-person teaching for the vast majority of courses. So I think students are feeling really forgotten and left out.
Preparations have been made in the dark, waiting for government advice promised over Easter. Today, confirmation all students in England will be allowed back May the 17th.
For students, the return of some face-to-face teaching is coming right at the end of a frustrating year, and it's likely to be very limited. We're not going to see full lecture halls. For those getting their degrees this summer, graduation ceremonies have been cancelled, all adding to their feeling of being overlooked and forgotten.
As students return, 3 tests will be offered under supervision, then free tests for students to use themselves. For those in charge of universities, just a few weeks now to get things ready.
Frankly, this is very late for us to do our planning, which makes it extraordinarily difficult for our students to know where to be, what they're going to be doing. I find it actually rather disrespectful that students don't have the certainty that other sectors of the economy, for example, tattoo parlours, do.
Campuses in England have been half empty, face-to-face teaching just for practical courses. But it's the sports, societies and social connections that many have missed.
I'm just hoping we can just have a large group of people in a room together of sorts at some point in the near future. It's been a very long time since it's been anywhere near to normality.
The majority of people who either aren't here yet or still working at home, it can be quite frustrating for them.
It'll be really exciting, I guess, when everything opens up again and we can actually enjoy university. And like we said before, it's not the experience we're expecting.
The library here has been open to help students, quiet study space away from their bedrooms. Even a brief return to campus, welcome for many. Branwen Jeffries, BBC News, York.
The row over the lobbying of government by David Cameron on behalf of the failed finance company Greensill shows no sign of going away. Boris Johnson insists the independent inquiry he's ordered will have carte blanche to talk to anyone. But Labour is trying to force a Commons vote on holding a full parliamentary inquiry into what it calls the rampant cronyism in government. Chris Mason has the latest.
The draw of power, the desire to influence those who govern us, to lobby, has always existed. But former Prime Ministers know how government works and know who works in government better than most. Today, Boris Johnson was asked about the review into Greensill Capital and David Cameron, and he said he's giving the senior lawyer running it a free rein.
I'd given him, pretty much carte blanche to ask anybody whatever he needs to find out, I would like it to be done quickly, but I want him to have the maximum possible access.
Right, take a look at this. It's 2009. David Cameron and the now Health Secretary Matt Hancock, before Mr Cameron was Prime Minister, and before Mr Hancock was even an MP.
I think we might be able to put something into your speech responding to this.
By 2013, David Cameron is Prime Minister, and he's given Matt Hancock a job as a minister. By 2019, Mr Cameron is working for Lex Greensill, Mr Hancock is in the Cabinet, and the three of them are going for a private drink.
Absolutely, I attended a social meeting organised by the former Prime Minister, and given that departmental business came up, I reported to officials in the normal way.
It is cronyism and it stinks. So if he thinks he has done nothing wrong and has nothing to hide, will he publish all the minutes, all the emails, all the correspondence, all the directions that he gave to civil servants and all his text messages with David Cameron so we can see exactly what went on with the awarding of this contract?
Mr Hancock insists he behaved properly and added,
What I would say is that it is very important that governments engage with external stakeholders, with businesses.
There are far bigger questions about access to government, lobbying, than are likely to be addressed in this government review. Its remit is narrow and it has no legal powers to change anything. Labour and others say the rules need to be tightened, the system needs to be more transparent, as tonight another detail emerges about Greensill Capital. A letter from the lobbying watchdog has revealed a former senior civil servant was given permission to work for Greensill Capital while he was still in government. Bill Crothers started working for the company in September 2015. He left the civil service 2 months later. We're told the Prime Minister is personally concerned about this. It's yet another strand for the review into what on earth went on here to explore. It's due to report in June. Chris Mason, BBC News at Westminster.
The Queen has returned to royal duties 4 days after the death of her husband, the Duke of Edinburgh, hosting the retirement of her household's most senior official, Lord Chamberlain Earl Peel. Prince Philip died at Windsor Castle on Friday. He was 99 years old. The Duke's funeral will take place at St George's Chapel in Windsor on Saturday. There's been a second night of violence on the streets of Minneapolis. Riot police face crowds of protesters angered by the fatal shooting of a black man. 20-year-old Daunt Wright was shot and died at the weekend after what the police say was an accident when an officer mistook her gun for a taser during a traffic stop. Tonight, the officer who shot him and the city's police chief have resigned. The shooting happened just a few miles from where the George Floyd murder trial is underway. From Minneapolis, Nick Bryant sent this report and a warning that it contains some distressing images.
It's a uniquely American story we've told many times before. Yet another police station besieged by yet another protest after yet another shooting of an unarmed African American. There was fury on the streets of Brooklyn Center last night. America's latest racial flashpoint, just 10 miles away from where the trial is taking place of the white police officer accused of murdering George Floyd. It began as a boisterous but non-violent demonstration. A response to the police shooting of a 20-year-old black man, Dante Wright, by a female officer who claims to have mistaken her handgun for a taser.
Do you know the difference between a gun and a taser?
The police were determined to enforce a curfew that came into effect as dusk turned into night. And determined to force the protesters off the streets. It's a police department very much on the defensive. Not that you'd have thought it last night.
May I have your attention, please? Captain Darling on behalf of the Brooklyn Center.
We see these confrontations year after year. America, as ever, fractured along its angriest fault line of race. This was the moment Dante Wright was pulled over for a minor infraction, and the police realised there was a warrant out for his arrest. In the scuffle that followed, the officer fired her gun and immediately realised her fatal error. Tonight, after 26 years in uniform, the officer, Kim Potter, resigned, and so too did the chief of the Brooklyn Center Police. Today, the mother of Dante Wright described how her son telephoned her after being stopped by the police. Then there was a second call with a friend he'd been driving with.
And she was crying and screaming, and she said that they shot him. And she pointed the phone towards the driver's seat, and my son was laying there, unresponsive. That was the last time that I seen my son. That's the last time I heard from my son, and I have had no explanation since then. I don't know what to do. I almost got hit by the police.
There was more looting last night, just yards from the police station. Another urban battlefield in the ongoing struggle over policing and over race. Nick Bryant, BBC News, Minnesota.
Trade between the UK and EU partially recovered in February after a steep drop the previous month. But as our global trade correspondent Darshini David reports, there's not enough information yet to make a judgment about the economic effects of Brexit.
The biggest changes in British trading arrangements for over 40 years meant a chaotic start to the new year for haulage boss Pete White.
Probably the worst, most difficult week I've had in this job in 20 years.
Weeks later, it's a different story as teething problems subside.
We're winning. That is the basic outlay of where it's going now. My process of customs was less than an hour. Very straightforward, but your paperwork has to be perfect. If your paperwork isn't 100% correct, you will get delays.
In February, the amount of goods we sold to the EU jumped by almost 47%. Dramatic, but that follows a plunge of 40% in January, while exporters struggled to get to grips with the new formalities, and some stayed away from shipping goods altogether for fear of disruption at the border. That trade has now resumed, but we're still down in terms of exports, more than 10% on where we were a year ago, due to the pandemic, and also as some companies still struggle with the new rules. Hardest hit, food. This supplier provides a taste of home for Brits wherever they roam. Hailed as an export success story by the government, but a deluge of complex rules have forced it to limit sales to the EU.
We've seen huge disruption. We've seen a massive drop in sales. We've had to reduce our workforce by 40 people, and we're moving those jobs into the EU. So I wouldn't say that's been successful at all.
Whether it's to your taste or not, Brexit is here. The government, which has delayed similar controls on goods coming in, says it's working to support exporters who are still struggling. The EU accounts for 2/5 of our exports. Protecting that trade means preserving profits and jobs. Darshini David, BBC News.
The US president has spoken to the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, calling on him to stop the buildup of troops on the border of Ukraine. Russia seized Crimea from Ukraine in 2014, and in recent weeks, fighting has increased in the east of Ukraine between government forces and Russian-backed separatists. Well, let's talk to our North America correspondent, Gary O'Donoghue, who's at the White House. And Gary, Joe Biden had some stern words for his Russian counterpart.
Yes, Fiona, after months of sort of concentrating on the domestic arena, COVID and the economy, Joe Biden now flexing his international muscles, calling Russia provocative for massing those troops on the Ukrainian border and inside occupied Crimea. Russia, in return, throwing that accusation straight back at Washington for sending 2 warships to the Black Sea. Now, Joe Biden is also suggesting the two men should meet for a summit in the coming months in a third country. That could be an interesting encounter, given that Joe Biden has already described Vladimir Putin in the past as soulless, and last month he agreed with a journalist who described him as a killer. So that could be a chilly summit when it does happen, but they do have things to talk about, not least climate change, Iran and Afghanistan. And on Afghanistan there is a lot to talk about, because the administration today announcing that it would withdraw all US military from the country before the 20th anniversary of 9/11 later this year, ending America's longest war, focusing its resources back on threats from China and indeed Russia. A reminder, Fiona, perhaps if we needed it, that the era of great power rivalry is very much back.
Gary O'Donoghue at the White House, thank you. New coronavirus restrictions are being imposed in Turkey as its infection rate soars. It is now second in the world in terms of new cases, behind only India, which has a population 16 times the size. Doctors are warning hospitals could soon be overwhelmed and have accused President Erdogan of having blood on his hands. Our international correspondent Orla Guerin reports from Istanbul.
Another life hanging in the balance. Turkey is gripped by a brutal third wave of COVID-19. This is the intensive care unit in Marmara University Hospital, one of the biggest in Istanbul. We found Dr. Ali Chetin exhausted and scared.
If the number of cases gets higher, we can find any beds, we can intubate our patients, and unfortunately they will